Somebody will.
Yes, no, I think we are. So if anybody's out there, say hi. Hi, I'm Angelique L'Amour.
Beau L'Amour, and write us something so that we know we're actually on
Live
the internet
right now. I think we are because it says end live video down there.
Yes.
So anyway, we are here to talk about Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, and the last time we got together, we talked about the overall plan for Lost Treasures, and we talked about the extra content that was in the back of the novels, several of the novels.
I don't think anybody's here yet.
That doesn't matter. We're still going to do it. Yes, 5 people are watching us.
Oh, okay. Look at that.
Okay, there we go. So, so we talked about that, and if you're interested in knowing more about the added content that's going at the back of the novels, please look at the Facebook Live that we did a month ago because it's still up on the page. And this time we are here to talk.
Wait on that. We're just going to wait for. We got 25 people. That's
probably
better. Pretty good. We'll do a couple, but so let me take care of this.
Okay.
The books that are part of Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. The first part of that are the books with a postscript. So these are the classic novels that you have all known and loved, and if they have this banner on them, they have a Lost Treasures postscript in them, and that is an article where I tell whatever story I can figure out or whatever I think is interesting about that particular book. It's always something different, and hopefully there'll be 30 plus of those. I think I might already have written 30 of them, but there's I don't know, eight or 10 out now. The next thing, the thing that we're going to be talking about today, is Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures. This is a hardcover that came out last year. The paperback has just come out, and it is full of either unfinished or unpublished works of my dad's, the unfinished stories in Lost Treasures Volume 1, and in 2019 there'll be a Lost Treasures Volume 2. When we got close to finishing cleaning up Dad's office, which was just an explosion of paper, we had tons and tons of stuff that was just piles of paper. It'd be one story, it'd switch to another story, it would switch to his laundry list, it would just completely random stuff. And we sorted out things into many of the books of short stories that have been published since he passed away. Some of the things that we found were copies of known manuscripts. We knew what they were, we filed those away. And pretty soon we ended up with a big dining room table full of pieces of things, some of which we put together and discovered what the thing was and have published it.
Okay, so we were talking about the order in which you decided to put things in the book, because I was kind of curious about it.
Don't bump that.
Maybe I made this all happen.
You might, maybe. Okay, so the order in which I put things in the book. One of the coolest stories that Dad wrote, one of the coolest of these fragments, is this one that we've called Jeremy Lacard. And it is a Western, it's kind of like a Western horror story, but it also has some otherworldly or science fiction elements, very much like the Californios. And that was such a perfect mixture of traditionally what he did and all this other weirdness.
Right.
Okay, then I thought, okay, well, that one has to come first.
It's really weird, and I really love it. I really wish there was more. And that was what made me so frustrated. Like, I was like, I want the rest of the story. Yeah. Where's the rest of the story?
So Jeremy Lacard had to come first, okay? And then I recognize that, well, so one of the important things to realize is a lot of these stories, maybe not the majority, but almost the majority of these stories, were written as an attempt, as Dad's attempt to get away from writing traditional Westerns.
Yeah.
Okay. So in the 1958 to 1962 time period, Dad tried very hard to just change what he did. He wrote a number of books that were very different. Actually, one of those books was The Walking Drum,
Right.
which was written in 1960, and he was not able to sell it at that time, and he tried a couple of other things to break away from writing Westerns all the time. I think he still wanted to write Westerns. He just didn't want to write only Westerns. And so since Lost Treasures Volumes 1 and Volume 2 are full of things that are kind of non-Westerns, or they're weird Westerns, like Jeremy Lecard, and there's a
Right.
couple of other weird ones in there. I figured that I would try and go every other story a Western, and therefore the traditional Western reader would be happy because they were getting a Western every once in a while.
Right.
But I also recognized that the last two stories in the book had to be Samsara, which is a fragment of a story about people that are reincarnated and are trying to regain the knowledge from their old incarnations, and it's a very strange story, and there's one version of it that is takes place in the time of Alexander the Great, and then there's another version of it that takes place in this weird sort of primitive time. You don't know if it's maybe in North America and the characters are Native Americans, or maybe it takes place in Africa. It's someplace where there's some kind of primitive, kind of tribal, roving tribal bands. And then there's a version of it, and this version is finished, and it's the Bible to a television series. And in that case, Dad decided that he would do. You want to just get that? I'm sure it's somebody calling us and complaining that the connection is bad.
Hello?
So hang on just a second.
I knew how to answer your phone.
Just
Hello?
push the button.
Hello? Well, they're not there.
Then hang up on them and don't worry about it. Sorry about that.
Life goes on.
Life goes on.
For my house, my dog would be barking.
In the television Bible, the character is a man that has a shop in Beverly Hills that deals with all kinds of antiquities, and he can take a look, or he can sort of touch the antique thing, and he's sort of transported into the world where that thing was was originally, and he can learn things about it. And so that was a version of it. And then before I go into the last version of it, I'm gonna sort of break away here and say that shop was Harry Franklin's
gallery
shop. So we had a friend who had a primitive African and oceanic art gallery in Beverly Hills, and it was this tiny, narrow little dark store that was just crowded with all of these weird masks and canoes and incredible
drums
jewelry and drums.
Yeah.
And it was just
Figures.
it was like a cabinet of curiosities. It was just the strangest, most wonderful place. It always kind of gave me bad dreams when I was a kid. But it was this, he very obviously was using his friend Harry's shop as the shop in Samsara. And then the final version of Samsara is very, very, very interesting because it is right out of Dad's life. It's literally like a chapter out of maybe what he would want it to have been his autobiography, except slightly fictionalized. And it's about a child like him living in Jamestown, North Dakota, with parents who are like his parents and an adopted brother who is like his adopted brother. And he meets this strange gypsy character, and he realizes that he is an incarnation, that he has lived past lives. And then the story jumps ahead to when he's in his late teens, early 20s, and like Dad, he's living on the beach in a seaport, and he runs into another guy who kind of helps him figure out how to connect with people that know more about this situation and more about his life history. And he sails off to the Far East to discover more things. So that had to be one of the last couple of stories. And then the final story is called Journey to Aksu, and it is a story about a soldier of fortune in China in the 1930s. And there was a time when that story was the continuation of the story of the kid on the docks in Samsara who sailed off to the Orient. And so the Journey to Aksu story would, in one version, was connected to the two, and that was the same character a few years later, having stayed in the Far East and become this kind of cynical soldier of fortune. And he goes off to Western China in a place where he discovers this strange city. And I think in one version, that was the city that had the records of the reincarnated people. And in Journey to Aksu, there is also a number of things that take place in China that Dad claimed were true. Now, I don't entirely believe this.
The guy with the book?
That is not there.
Okay.
And we don't need to go there.
Okay.
That will take 20 minutes. But anyway, he told some of these stories as if they were true and as if they were about him. And some of them were true, just not, I can't track all of them down. And so that seemed like a really nice place to end this book, and just kind of, when you read it, you'll understand why that's a good ending. I don't want to blow it and tell you.
So as a reader,
yeah,
I'm going to ask you two questions that are virtually the same, different points of view. As a reader, which story in this volume in particular made you the most frustrated that it wasn't finished?
I don't have any frustration with any of these not being finished.
Or just, I really wish I could read the rest of it.
I never even really felt that.
Okay.
You have to understand.
So as a writer, the answer would be the same.
I don't know. Let me think about that for a second.
Okay.
You have to understand, I'm just a mechanic. Okay, like I think
you're more than that, but okay.
I work with Dad's stuff
right.
to such an extent that I don't really have an emotional investment in it. It's fascinating and really meaningful when I learn something about him. Mm-hmm. And in many of these stories, I learn something about him in doing the research that allows me to write the things that I write that explain the story. Hang on just a second. The things that I write that explain the stories.
Right.
That's really fascinating when I learn things about his life and learn things about his personality. But in a lot of ways, I'm just working on it, and wherever the writing stops. I mean, in almost all of these stories, one of the reasons I'm able to write a commentary or an article or whatever it is about the unfinished or the finished piece is because I've done some research. It's not just something that comes out of my own head, and it's not just based on the original manuscript. I actually have more information. I have more pieces of paper. I have more, notes, and Dad kept a pretty good diary and things like that.
Did the notes, the postscript notes, and the notes on these stories, were they found with the stories, or were they found in his journal?
You mean all the different fragments?
Well, I'm just saying, like, because I know that there were 3-foot piles all over
Okay.
that office.
Okay,
So I'm like, where were the notes?
No, they were everywhere. They were
Okay.
just scattered randomly around, and I'm so familiar with
The stories.
all of the stuff that Dad wrote that I can pick up a note
And figure it
and
out.
look at it and have a well. I got a drawer full of stuff I can't figure out.
Okay.
Okay, but usually I can pick up a note and I'll see something that clues me into what
It
story,
reminds you.
to what story it was.
Okay, let's see. I've got before we take questions. Okay. I'm like, this is what I was doing this week. So the one other question I had for you. Hold on, I want to look this up really quickly because I was trying to.
I
figure
will
it out.
dance
Do you
and
want-
entertain all
You're
of these
no.
people.
Okay, number one. Earlier in the last one, you said that one story you were not quite done with.
Okay, so that is the Golden Tapestry.
That's the golden ticket,
Okay,
and
that
that's
is
the
it.
golden ticket. We need to know why you
No,
say that.
that is the Golden Tapestry.
Yeah, no, I know.
That is in Lost Treasures Volume 1. And I really liked it. Okay, so the cool thing about the Golden Tapestry is it really feels like the environment and the characters and everything out of a classic Alfred Hitchcock movie.
Oh,
Okay.
okay,
And,
yes.
And as I took the 10 or 12 different drafts of it and kind of shuffled them to get the best
Mhm.
version of it, I really liked the characters. The hero is kind of a con man who's just barely, kind of keeping it together, and the heroine is a woman who is kind of she was a Neiman Marcus fashion model. So it takes place in the early 1960s, and she's kind of this, she's kind of this personality without really being. Her face is known,
Right.
and she's in all this trouble. She had married this Indian guy who at one time had been very wealthy, and then he had kind of lost most of what he had, and the two of them he had something that was going to put them back in the chips again, and then he's killed.
Right.
And she's sort of looking for it, and our con man character joins in and helps, and it takes place in Istanbul, and it's just there were great characters, and it's a great situation, and there is a movie treatment to it.
Right.
So there is a finished version of it. You can read I don't know if it's 2 or 4 chapters of the novel. It's been a long time since I worked on this. It's been 2 years. But there's 2 or 4 chapters of the novel, and then there's several page, maybe dozen-page movie treatment that outlines a potential plot. I don't think it was a plot that Louis would have been satisfied with when he actually sat down and started writing. I think he would have written something more involved, and
It kind of has the feel that it has the ability to have the sort of the breadth, the largeness of a story that The Walking Drum does, as opposed to some of the westerns that were sort of one man against the elements and against the bad guys. It's expansive, the way that The Walking Drum was expansive. So it feels like there's a lot of potential in it to go a lot of different ways. And
Dad really. He even made a note that he wanted it to be something like the Maltese Falcon.
right,
Okay.
right.
And
I know. I'm like, which character is Peter Lorre?
Yeah. Well, it's a more it's even a more expansive story than that. But it's just a period. I love that late 50s, early 60s time period, and especially in Europe and the Near East. And so I just thought that was a great.
Very, very cool.
I thought that was a great story.
Very cool. Do you want to see if there are any questions?
Are you ready to take questions?
We can take questions and
Okay.
we can see how we're doing, if there are any. If we missed any from
We'll come
section
back,
one, we'll work on that later. So now, if you want to write in some questions, come on and write some questions in to us.
Yeah.
And I'm going to see, there was one other page. I turned down too many pages, so now I have to figure out what I was going to ask you a question about. Oh, okay. I found that Trail of Tears to me was really, really interesting time period. I don't think that, I know I wasn't taught in the late 70s, early 80s about the time period prior to that taking place, before the Cherokees and everybody
Were removed. Yeah.
to Oklahoma. I didn't know how developed their society was, and it seems that it was very developed and very, very Anglo in style, and that it presented in the story. They're having stores, and they're part of the town government, and they're being productive citizens in a way that's not just out on their own. And then there is this group that's out on their own, and that's the story. I just found myself going, well, okay, the story's not here, but I need to know more about that time period. I really want to know more about what was going on.
Unfortunately, the kind of history we get in education sort of just skips everything interesting that happened between wars. So you have the Revolutionary War, maybe you get something about the War of 1812, and then you're in the Civil War, and it's kind of like, well, there was all kinds of stuff that happened.
It was like 50 years there that we just missed. So let's see, did we get any questions? Not yet. We're working on that. I'm going to double check and see if on section 1 there's anything that we might want to answer, because I think there were a few.
Sounds good.
But I just didn't, we just had our glitch. Let's see, we've got 88 comments. Let's see what happens. I've got any. We have people from New Zealand. Okay. So I'm reading through comments here. Let's see, what happened? So are there, okay, here we go. Zach Bradkovich says, Walking Drum is by far my favorite. Did you leave enough material for a ghostwriter to do a second novel?
There is, I not too many months ago, I finished, the months are back there, that's why I was pointing. Not too many months ago, I finished the Lost Treasures Postscript, so the piece that's going to go in the back of the Walking Drum, and I realized that there actually is a pretty good sequel. Dad planned on there being 2 sequels, so he originally planned on a three book series, and the next book is pretty well laid out, and I have put everything that I know, and I've tried to make it make as much sense as possible in the postscript there. The third book is only vaguely laid out. And so book 2, yes, but will we ever have another writer do that? I don't know about that. I have never liked the idea of taking on, kind of a Louis L'Amour ghostwriter. Obviously, sometimes I have done it. But at the same time, I'm mostly comfortable working on the sort of stuff of my dad's that people don't have high expectations of, and don't have really specific expectations for it to be a particular way. When somebody says they want a sequel to The Walking Drum, generally they mean they want a sequel that is exactly the way they would like it to be, but I don't know what that is. And so I would rather that sequel exist in your imagination. And I like doing this thing with Lost Treasures, where I can put in a postscript, I can give you all the information I have, and then you can imagine it. But at this moment, I don't have any plans for myself or anybody else to write a Walking Drum sequel.
See if you can scroll down a little bit.
Oh, yeah, okay. So let me scroll.
I just don't know if anybody started. Yeah. Any word on the Sackett Saga?
Not sure what that means. Jeff, if you want to write a further question about any word on the Sackett Saga, like specifically what you're asking, I'd be happy to answer it.
Yeah. Is the Golden Tapestry available? Well, it's in.
The Golden Tapestry is in Louis L'Amour's Lost Treasures, Volume 1. That it is one of the various chapters or sections in that book.
Let's see.
You want me to scroll
I
more?
want you to scroll more.
Okay.
Because we're doing good. I'm pretty quick at reading them. Will it be a volume 2? Volume 2 comes out in 2019.
Yes, and it will look very much like this, except at the moment, I think it's going to be red instead of yellow.
And it will say volume 2.
Right.
Which will help you. Anything about his writings on the early life of Tel Sackett?
There is a little bit, and I'm kind of saving the postscript for the Sackett stories till the end, because the longer I work on these things, the more I learn for other stories. So it's very common for me to be working on one of these postscripts, and I'll learn something about another one, and then I can rush over to that postscript and put it in there, and or I bother my editor at Random House and say, "Oh, you've got to change it because I just learned something," and so I'm leaving the Sack. I don't have a lot of Sackett information, but I'm leaving what I have till the last of the postscripts that I do, so I'll know as much as I possibly can, because I know people are really interested in that.
I know. I remember him saying something about writing a Tel Sackett Civil War story.
Yeah, and there is some information about it. A little, don't get your hopes up.
Not as much as you might like.
Not as much as you might like.
So let's see. Scroll. Let's see. Wondering if your dad liked Marty
Robbins, absolutely.
Okay.
I was just doing something about my dad and Marty Robbins, and if you pay attention to Facebook, you might even see the two associated with one another again.
I'm really
slightly.
curious about that.
Dad liked Marty Robbins, so there you go.
So there you go.
Yeah.
Okay. So wait, I'm here. So
Right.
let's see. We talked about Walking Drum a little bit, that there was some information. I think we just covered that a little earlier. Let's see. Okay, go on down. Wayne.
Okay, wait, no. I've watched interviews with Louis L'Amour. I get the distinct impression he was a humble man, or certainly not an egoist. I believe he would have no problem with his partially completed works being brought to completion. I think you're right. Except I don't find an awful lot of writers that I trust, and there are certain things that I want to do and not want to do. So that is true, but finding somebody who's capable of doing the work is difficult.
Okay, we talked about Tel. So let's scroll down.
Okay.
Craig Sherinian.
Hi, Craig.
Hi, Craig. What book or story of your father's is your very favorite?
I really like Fallon, and it's just a short early '60s Western, but it's got a great sense of humor, and you can just tell that Dad was having
Really
a
good time.
fantastic time as he wrote it, because it's just got a wonderful sense of language, and it's very light. It's a story that's a lot like The Music Man, and
Right.
and so it's a wonderful story. I really like that one.
Let's see. Any idea how it came up with the name of Con Judy as a character?
No clue.
Not a thing.
Dad had he had a large set of records from the Civil War, and one of the books in that set, and this is sort of like all the official documents from both armies, North and South, during the Civil War, and one of the books in that set is the index, and it indexes every name that's referenced in all of those Civil War dispatches. And so if you want good 19th century names, that's the perfect place to go. And so it's possible. I think Con Judy, the name was created before he bought those, but where he got a lot of names.
Okay. Is there any chance of filling in the missing 300 years? We're talking about the Sacketts, I guess.
Yes, and there will be information in the Sackett postscripts that clarifies some of the, transitional material. Fair Blows the Wind is a chantry story. This is the first chantry story, and in the postscript in this book, I go into a lot of the intervening chantry history and things like that, and then in future chantry books, I fill in even more.
This is a good one.
Okay, so what's this?
This is kind of fun. Your dad had elements of supernatural,
Cryptozoology.
cryptozoology, ancient unproven legends, etc. in some of his novels. Where did that interest come from? It was very unusual and interesting for the time. Well, he really liked the idea of Bigfoot and the Loch Ness Monster.
Yeah, no, he loved
He
anything
wanted to see them.
that was like, he was a fiction writer. Fantasy was something he was really into. When we never did this, but one of the things that he subscribed to, and this was long before there were, obviously my dad didn't live in the era of email, but we were on this mailing list. It was the Institute or something like that for Short-Lived Phenomena.
Oh,
and
really?
what happened is some weird thing would happen somewhere in the world.
Right.
And this group of people would then send a postcard out to everyone on their mailing list
And tell them about the weird thing.
about the weird thing. And I know that we didn't really ever have the money, but Dad was always saying, it's like one of these days we're gonna find something really weird. The postcard is gonna come in and it'll be like there's a sea monster up on the beach here. There's this or that, and we're gonna go there.
Well, when I was 15, we were in Scotland. Beau wasn't with us, and Mom and Dad and I were in Scotland with my mom's godson and my girlfriend, and we were traveling, and we did go to Loch Ness, and we did hang out on the shore for a while, because that was always a great desire, was to see Nessie, but we didn't that day. So, there were moments like that. He loved anything weird and interesting that was not necessarily explainable. Do you have a page or a site we can look up to see what you have? LouisL'Amour.com.
Louis L'Amour's LostTreasures.com. You can get there from LouisL'Amour.com also.
Okay. After you've shared all the lost treasures, I think we would all get a kick out of your writing what is often referred to as fan fiction. I just would not read it from anyone else but you two. Well, thank you.
Yeah.
I would guess he had lots of scribbles left behind that you could use. So when you want to write reboots, continue any saga, I get a kick out of fan fiction from you two. Okay.
We'll see what the publisher is up for. That's always a question. So it'll be interesting to see. It'll be interesting to see how many people buy No Traveler Returns, which is kind of what you're talking about. And so we'll see how sales are of that.
We're checking.
Any new movies in the making? Okay. There is no way to answer a question about filmmaking or films until a film is actually being shot. I mean, a movie is in the maybe stage all the way until they finally say, okay, now we're going to start.
It can be years between we'd like to option the book and actually somebody saying roll it.
Yeah, and you never know what's going to happen. It's just it's so hard to tell. I was in that business for years, and it's always just a big mess.
Okay, would love to know if any of the second book is in any of the Lost Treasures. I'm not sure what you're talking about.
We don't know what the second book is.
Will there be a follow-up to the Last of the Breed?
There will not be a follow-up book to Last of the Breed, but the new Lost Treasures edition of Last of the Breed will have a great deal of information about Last of the Breed. It'll have a great deal of information about the short story that is a missing, mysterious element to the middle of Last of the Breed that somehow didn't get included. It will it will have information about the movie version, which I'm sure will never happen now. I think that the rights to that are lost forever, but there's some interesting information there. And there was at one time, and there may be again we just have to see if we can find a publisher, a comic book version. So there's all kinds of information about Last of the Breed, should you be interested in it. And I'm not sure when the Lost Treasures Postscript version of Last of the Breed is coming out.
Have you written it?
I have written it, but
Okay.
and it won't be out this year, but hopefully next year.
Okay, we've got more questions that are down.
Okay, we're going to scroll down a little
Okay,
bit.
So let's see. Just trying to Riley's Luck into a movie.
I think Riley's Luck actually would be a fantastic television miniseries. And there was a brief time when I was involved in just the barest beginnings of a miniseries adaptation to Riley's Luck. And some of the notes I made on Riley's Luck at that time and what would be interesting to develop. So these would be the ideas that would be interesting to develop and how you would go about developing them into a film script. Those notes can be found in Louis L'Amour's LostTreasures.com website. In the website exclusives section, there's a whole big breakdown that I did on Riley's Luck, where I just completely kind of peel apart all the different elements of the novel. And you may agree with me or you may not agree with me, but this is also the thought process is what it looks like when a screenwriter begins to think about a project and how to turn it into a movie. So if nothing else, you might be interested in the fact that it kind of gives you an idea of what happens in the early stages of filmmaking.
Okay, let's see. Okay, keep going.
Uh-huh.
What authors do you like to read?
I read mostly nonfiction now, and so that could be all kinds of different authors. I have always enjoyed Philip Kerr, who writes kind of mysteries, and he has so there's two sort of Germany-oriented things. One of them is Philip Kerr, who writes all these mysteries about his detective is a German policeman in the era of not just the Nazis, but starting before the Nazis come to power in Europe, and then even going after the war. I think the stories go all the way into the 1950s. And then the other guy that I really, really like is Alan Furst, and he writes sort of early thrillers that take place in the early days of World War II. And Alan Furst is really remarkable in that he can do more with a 12-word sentence of just normal words. I mean, you can just write a string of words you heard every day, and all of a sudden you're in this incredible space where you can sort of like smell the coal smoke and feel the damp air, and he's just he's wonderful at just sort of putting you in the spot. It really the kind of qualities he has, the kind of quality that a lot of writers from my dad's era were really good at. They could really get in and make an impact, make a really kind of impact on your senses with just a very, very few words. So he's one of the few guys still writing like that.
I find it interesting because I'm a huge mystery fan. Like for me, it's mysteries. I love historical mysteries in particular, and I find it interesting that both of us move into the mystery.
I actually don't like mysteries.
You don't like, but you like them.
I like well.
I love mysteries. So that's
the Alan First thing is kind of espionage stories, and I'm not really that much of a mystery fan.
I've always loved mysteries. I think since I was 8 or 9 years old, 7, 8, 9 years old. The first one being the one that seemed to be written about us, but wasn't. Let's see. I'm just looking to see.
are the postscripts only in the books. I have all his books and don't want to buy duplicates. You can go to the library where they're free. Eventually, libraries will have these. At the moment, if you wanted to read it right away, you're going to have to buy it.
Are you guys working with Audible at all? Would love to see Bendigo Chapter.
Yeah, we have, I think, over 100 audiobooks that are available, and they're all on Audible. Bendigo Chapter. I don't even know if we've done it yet. I've lost track.
I don't know if we've.
I'm even in charge of
Bendigo.
this stuff, and I don't.
I don't think
can't keep it. I can't keep it straight sometimes from one day to the next.
There was one it was about Sitka. It will be a postscript on Sitka, and then somebody right above that says it would be a great movie, and then there was a question of whether or not there's a postscript to Sitka. Is there?
There will be no postscript to Sitka, but there is a little story. This doesn't make quite enough. When I do a postscript, I don't like to add something to a book that is so little that somebody would spend a bunch of money on it and not find it enough information to be interesting. And so I've never really felt that I had enough on Sitka to do a good postscript and to make it worth somebody's money. But at the same time, I'll tell a Sitka story. So the mystery to Sitka is that it was Dad wrote it at the behest of a movie studio. I believe it was MGM. And so they wanted him to write, they wanted to make a movie about the purchase of Alaska. They did not have underlying material, but they had an idea of what they wanted to do plot-wise. Okay, so they gave him like their rough notes to the plot, and he wrote it and owned the novel. So the deal is that he got the novel, they got the film rights, and they gave him a little bit of money to write the novel immediately and give them the film rights or the permission to use anything that he created on top of the ideas that they created. And so anyway, he basically wrote it at their direction, and then the movie was never made. So
it seems like more of a joint project with everybody sort of giving a little and getting a little, even though it didn't get made into a film, compared to some of the other things.
Yeah, we don't have any correspondence other than the contract and things like that. So there's no good input.
I'm just going to see if we can take one more question because we're getting down to the wire.
We can go a little longer. Is there a reason why we shouldn't go longer?
No, I don't think so. As long as people are interested.
Yeah, we can go a little longer.
Was there a full book that he wrote that didn't get to print and hopefully one day might be printed?
Okay, so this was I don't know if you call it a full book. It was unfinished, but I could tell what it was supposed to be. And this will be for people just joining us. This will be coming out in November.
And we'll be talking about it on the next.
Yeah, we'll talk about it in depth. And so it was. Dad wasn't really ready to write No Travel or Returns. This was his first novel. He was in his early 30s, and he was just at the time. This was right at the time he was writing the Yondering stories. It actually is one of the Yondering stories. It shares characters with the Yondering short stories, and but he had this very, very complicated idea of what he wanted to do. It's an extremely sophisticated and kind of artistic concept, and I don't know that he was capable of writing it. And I'm not saying I'm so much smarter than he is, but I had 30 years of looking at this book and rereading this book and it knocking around in the back of my mind before I went to work on it and finished it. And it wasn't that isn't just like writing the end. That's like making everything in it work and interconnect and do what it needs to do. And like I said, it's a very complicated novel. Um, and and I'm not entirely sure he ever would have figured out how to write. It's so complicated that I don't know that he ever would have figured out how to write certain parts of it without a word processor. Because there's just a lot of adjustments that have to be made, all through it. So it's a complicated process.
Let's see. Going down there. Any new Sackett stuff coming out?
No, like I said, there will be Lost Treasures Postscript material in some of the Sackett stories.
Is there anybody currently producing a set of all the Louis L'Amour books in leather or hardback?
No, that process is over. The people who are still enrolled in the subscription collection will hopefully get all of their books. I've been pushing Random House to make sure that everybody is taken care of, but there will not be a new offering where someone can sign up new.
Can you comment on his early writing and how he became the phenomenal writer he was? 365 days a year of writing for 50 years.
Yeah, no, and there was also, the interesting answer to that question is, again, if you look at this book, No Traveler Returns, his first novel, and I was just saying that it is a very complicated book, and there was a lot of thought in it. It was something that was going to have to be rewritten, over and over to get it all right. And that's very interesting, but it was going to be very difficult to do a lot of writing and make good money by writing that kind of material, that kind of complex material.
Something that took a lot of time
and so one of the things that Dad did was he trained himself to write out of his unconscious. So you hear about like stream of consciousness writing. This was like that. I call it stream of unconscious writing. And he could literally sit down at the typewriter and start typing and start telling a story and not know what was going to happen, and write all the way through to the end. And the very positive thing about that is his interest and excitement in discovering what was going to happen is part of the magic of most of his writing. But writing like that allowed him to go to just do a lot of writing. He could write more and more and more and more stuff. Projects like No Traveler Returns, you couldn't write 4 of those a year. I don't know that you could write one every 4 years.
Yeah.
And so he adjusted his writing style, and then and this is not to be underestimated in the slightest. He trained his brain. I don't even know that he knew that he was doing it, but he trained his brain to write in this much more efficient manner. And then that's most of what everybody has read of Lou's.
I think that was a really good way of explaining that. Let's see. Why didn't Beau and Angelique write a continuum of the Sacketts?
Okay, so I'm going to answer my answer, and then you can answer your answer. I don't like doing stuff where I'm going to be directly compared with the most popular work of my dad's. It's like there are going to be some people who are unhappy about it, always. And the idea of going in and filling in those, kind of meticulously researching everything to sort of figure out how to fill in the gaps and do what Dad was going to do. I got to say, I'm not that interested. And we grew up in a household with a guy who loved writing Westerns, but throughout our entire lives, he felt like he was trapped writing Westerns. And he made, and this is very important, this next thing I'm going to say. I mentioned in one of the earlier pieces of this interview, but I'll say it again here. In the Dad was a hit writing Westerns in the late 50s. He wasn't super popular. He wasn't the best guy out there. He wasn't selling more than anybody else, but he was a high-ranking Western writer and a high-producing Western writer. And he wrote a good, in that time period, he wrote, say, a dozen novels. And once he had done that, and once he saw that he was somewhat successful, and once he had landed at Bantam Books and they had agreed to take all of the books that he wrote, the next thing he tried to do was to do other things than writing Westerns. And they didn't really want him to. And other publishers weren't interested in his work that was non-Western either. Like I said, The Walking Drum was written right at this time period, and nobody would take it. And so his idea at that point was, okay, so I can't break out, I can't just write a couple of non-Westerns a year and have people accept them. Publishers weren't accepting that. So his new idea was, I'm going to take as long as it takes, and I'm going to very slowly and carefully adjust Westerns and the idea of what a Western is until it gives me the opportunity to do more and different things. And so that's, he started doing things like, okay, I'm going to start the Sackett series in the late 1500s, and I'm gonna do Fair Blows the Wind, which is the first Chantry story, and that's going to take place at that same, roughly in that same time period. And so he decided he was going to change, instead of breaking away from writing Westerns, he was going to change Westerns, which is really remarkably ambitious. And it's remarkably ambitious for a guy that was pretty old. I mean, he got this idea in his head in his 60s. And I mean, he was 53 when I was born, 56 when she was born. And so it was a very ambitious idea, but the idea was to get out of having to write conventional Westerns. So at least when you talk to me about that, you're like saying, oh, don't you want to write Westerns? It's kind of like, yeah, I want to write one or two Westerns, but I lived in a house with a guy that was constantly trying to do other things. And so to a certain extent, they feel a little bit like a trap.
Okay, so I'm going to answer.
Yeah.
My ambitions are in the world of children's books, juvenile fiction, middle grade, YA, and I just had a brilliant idea for a picture book that I hope I'm going to feel this out. So I will say this. My first book that I chose to work on that was a historical, I chose to place in a time period my father did not write about, and as far as I know, never wrote about. I will not talk about it any more than that. I just say that somewhere down the line in the next 5 to 10 years, I'll have a historical adventure story that comes out that's a YA, most likely, that takes place during the time period Dad didn't write about. Which, and part of the reason is because it's a time period that excites me, and part of the reason is because he didn't write about it. And I have one short story that I wrote that I have not published anywhere, that I just wrote for my own self, that started from a conversation I had with Dad. And someday maybe somebody will see that. But I try to stay away from what I consider his eras. And I don't know that I would ever feel as well-read, well-researched to be able to sort of compete.
No, it's crazy.
That too.
It's crazy to compete
It
with
was
that.
so good.
It's just not.
And I also
it's
think,
not worth it.
I also think I'm going to throw myself out here on a limb.
Yeah.
So I also think you look back and you say Larry Murtry won Pulitzer for Lonesome Dove. I do not think that would have even been possible without the career that Dad had prior to that, which led people to look at Westerns in a way that allowed it to be fiction of quality.
Oh, you're going to get hate over that one.
I may get hate over that, but what I'm saying is, I'm not saying it's not an amazing book. I'm just saying that if he'd written it 20 years earlier, it would have been dime store literature. And there was a lot that Dad did to, as his success came, as he developed stories deeper, and he did what he did, that allowed Westerns to sort of move beyond that dime store mentality that allowed it to become something that was a greater genre. And we used to talk about it, about how anything that happened west of the Mississippi was considered a Western, and anything that happened east of the Mississippi was considered a historical. And a historical instantly had more cachet or more whatever. So, that's what I'm saying. I'm not saying anything against Mr. McMurtry and his book. I'm just saying that I think that the door was opened. So let's see if we have any more wonderful questions that we want to answer. Let's see. Okay.
Any idea why he never wrote a story about the other two Sackett brothers of Tell, Horn, and Tyrell? Isn't the dead guy in Borden Chantry a Sackett brother from that family?
Ooh.
I think that one of those characters does show up, but just as a corpse.
What were their names?
I can't remember. I think it was Joe Sackett, but
Joe. See, okay. No, I instantly went back. See, I instantly went back to Barnabas and Abigail because of the daughter and this Brian, who never showed up again because he went to.
Yeah, look at that. Somebody's sitting here. Joe Sackett.
Joe Sackett.
Yeah.
Okay, there we go. We knew somebody was going to know that. Somebody agreed with me on that.
Right.
Okay. Let's see.
Do you want me to back it up?
No, I'm good. I was just skimming on down. Somebody up there said it must be hard to be the child of someone like that. That we should just be us. I think we're pretty good.
It's not that hard.
It's
hard. I mean, the way you make it hard is
if
you're either of us and decide to go out and write westerns.
That would be hard.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm going to write a western about a family.
Well, no, and I'm gonna try and take myself really seriously and have an ego about that and everything. Yeah,
I think one of the things that's really important to understand about the L'Amour family is that the L'Amour family that Dad came from was also a family of writers. He had a sister who was a published writer and ran a newspaper and wrote books. He had a brother who was a newspaper man. He had another older sister who wrote poetry and died at the age of 17. So she was not very published, but people knew about her writing. So it seems like that generation had 4 writers that came out of 7 kids. So that was pretty amazing. So you do have families that have, doctors and lawyers and writers.
Right.
And actors, if you look at the Barrymores.
Well, and you also have to recognize when people are asking these questions, I've also written and supervised the writing of a whole bunch of Dad's audios. Okay, so the dramatized audios, which is like doing a screenplay, and a number of screenplays. So it's sort of like when I say I also don't necessarily want to get myself in a position where I'm writing a lot of westerns. I also have written a lot of westerns.
You have. Let's see. Sleeping. Concerning your dad's meticulous attention to location detail, would he constantly revisit locations while preparing new stories, or did he just have an amazing memory?
No, he had a great memory. He was really good with maps. When he first went into the Army, he was in the tank destroyers, which was not necessarily a serious long range artillery situation, but they had enough artillery school so that they really learned to read terrain off of a map very, very well. And Dad tended to write a lot of the places that he wrote about weren't just places he visited. They were places that he had lived in for a while. I don't necessarily mean years, but they were places where he might have spent a couple of weeks or a couple of months. And,
not just a day or two.
Yeah. And so he did really write about places that he knew fairly well.
He never forgot anything, and
Right.
and I could really only think of one time that I know of that he got lost.
It's definitely a pre-internet mind.
Yeah, where where the only way things came to you instantly was if they were already in there. Let's see. Okay, I think we're good. Oh, look, Bill Sackett just said hello, Lamores. Hi.
Hello, Bill. Okay, so we're gonna sign off, but
Wrap it up.
I'm gonna go through and answer every question that is written down that I can think of. If I don't answer something, it's either because I just don't know, or it's because I've already answered a question that's very similar to it. And if you look back through other people's questions, you'll probably get your answer. There's no reason. I mean, you can keep asking questions till tomorrow. I'll go back through it again. Tomorrow. Then I probably won't look at it again. But there's no reason why you can't keep asking questions tonight, and I will get to everything that I can, and I'll be as intelligent as I can, and we'll just see what happens. So, good night. Sorry for the technical problems.
Thank you for hanging in there with us.
Yeah.
And if anybody's asked a question that is specifically to me, I will try to find it, and I will do my best. Otherwise, he's your man.
Also, when do we do this again?
I don't have the date directly in my head because I didn't know what the pub date was, but somewhere late October.
So in a month or so, and we'll put this on Facebook and
tweet
Instagram and Twitter. We'll basically go on social media and we'll say when we're going to do this again. And the next time we get together, instead of talking mostly about the Lost Treasures Volume 1 book, we will talk about No Traveler Returns and Dad's Past and Yondering and things like that. So anyway, that's it for tonight. Keep asking questions if you'd like to, and take care.
Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.